Welcome to the world behind midnight. Tonight's file was unsealed after a joint DARPA and SEAL team operation in the Louisiana Bayou resulted in contact with a coordinated PAC-6 Dogman in a restricted corridor that the government spent 3 years pretending was empty swamp. The mission briefing said there were 6 of them, the PAC-6 Dogmen, in a restricted wetland corridor south of Forked Island, Louisiana. What the briefing didn't say, what no one at Pensacola Naval Air Station bothered to mention, was that the PAC already knew the team was coming. The mud told them, the water told them, the root systems running 50 feet below the bayou floor told them. 6 Navy SEALs walked into an ambush wearing night vision, and the things waiting for them don't need eyes. The helicopter dropped them into darkness 11 kilometers from the target corridor. No lights, no flares. No communication except encrypted burst transmissions every 40 minutes. Standard infiltration protocol for a non-standard assignment. Weston Mooney stepped off the skid into ankle-deep water and immediately understood why Maximilian Nichols had pulled him aside before Wheels Up and said, very quietly, "Keep count of everything you hear, not what you see, what you hear." At the time, Mooney thought it was the kind of vague atmospheric instruction commanding officers gave before operations they weren't sure about. By the time they reached the first waypoint, he had filled half a page in his field notebook with sounds he couldn't explain, a bass vibration in the ground, like a subwoofer buried 6 feet down, that came and went in intervals, cypress trees creaking with no wind, and once, briefly, something that sounded like breathing from a direction that held nothing but open water. Genevieve Austin had been on the helicopter. She was not supposed to be. Nichols had argued against her inclusion at Pensacola, formally, in writing, and been overruled by someone to pay grades above him, whose name appeared nowhere in the briefing packet. She moved through the bayou with more comfort than any of the operators expected. She wore no rank, carried no weapon, and had already informed Bradley Burton, who had tried to take her pack, that she was not a logistical problem to be managed. Burton had laughed. She had not. He stopped finding it amusing somewhere around the 2nd kilometer in, when she identified a track in the mud that none of them had seen. Pressed the heel of her hand into it, looked at Mooney, said nothing. The track was the size of a dinner plate. It was pointed toward them, not away. Leo Morgan's audio equipment began producing anomalous readings at 01 for 7 hours, local time. The software was designed to detect ambient acoustic signatures and flag biological sources. It had never been tested in Louisiana Bayou. What it flagged repeatedly, from 3 distinct bearing points, registered in the software not as a biological sound source but as low-frequency seismic activity. Leo recalibrated twice, rebooted the unit. The readings came back identical. He pulled Mooney aside and showed him the display. Mooney looked at the 3 bearing points. He looked at the terrain map on his tablet. He looked back at Leo. The 3 bearing points formed a rough triangle. They were standing inside it. Kylie Mitchell was on overwatch at a cypress stand, 200 meters north, elevated on a platform of packed roots and deadfall. She had line of sight to the entire approach. She saw nothing through her thermal scope, except the team moving below her, and the uniform cold signature of the swamp. No warm bodies. No heat bloom from animals in the brush. She reported this to Mooney at 0202 hours, he acknowledged. She did not tell him, not until the formal debrief, 6 days later, that she had seen the water ripple in a pattern that moved against the current. Against it, as if something large was moving through it, not by swimming, but by walking along the bottom. Nichols called the first halt at 0215 hours. The team consolidated behind a massive fallen tupelo that had been dead long enough to be mostly mineral white, bleached, harder than concrete. He laid the DARPA terrain overlay on top of the topographic map and pointed to a zone the overlay marked in amber, not red, amber. The amber designation, Genevieve Austin would later explain to the inquiry board, indicated a confirmed territory boundary, not a threat zone, a boundary. Something had claimed the marsh in a radius of approximately 9 square kilometers, and maintained that claim with enough consistency over the 18 months of satellite observation that DARPA had been able to map it with reasonable precision. The mission objective was inside that radius. The extraction point was outside it. The plan required them to enter the claim zone, move to the den site the drone footage had identified 3 weeks prior, execute the eradication, and exit before the pack could coordinate a response. The plan assumed the pack required time to coordinate. That assumption did not survive contact with the Vermilion Parish Bayou. At 0231 hours, Mooney heard the first direct vocalization. It was not a howl. It was not a growl. It was a sound he described in his field notes as pressure, then crossed out and rewrote as the feeling of being told something in a language you don't have the hardware to process. It came from the south, then, 4 seconds later, from the north, then from the east. Bradley Burton had his weapon up before Mooney finished turning. Genevieve Austin was writing in her notebook. The dominant male showed itself first. This was not an accident. Mooney understood this immediately, in the same instinctive way an experienced operator understands the geometry of an ambush, not by analysis, but by the body's prior knowledge of being outmaneuvered. The thing stepped out of the cypress tree line 60 meters ahead, and every member of the team froze. Not from indecision, from the specific category of freeze that the human nervous system produces when it encounters something it cannot immediately file under any existing category. It was bipedal. It was enormous. The head was wrong, too long, too narrow at the crown, the ears rising from a skull that housed a brain case clearly larger than the jaw suggested, and it was looking at them, not scanning, not reacting, looking, with the considered patience of something that has already decided how this encounter resolves. Mooney gave the engagement order at 0238 hours. Kylie Mitchell took the first shot from Overwatch, a center mass 300 Win Mag at 170 meters. She connected. She did not miss. The round struck the dominant male in the left thoracic region, and it moved. Not fell. Moved. Sideways and backward, simultaneously, dropping to all fours, in a motion so fluid it looked rehearsed, and disappeared into the cypress stand. The team registered no thermal signature on the entry point. Nothing. Leo Morgan said, directly into the team channel, very quietly, "It's not bleeding hot." And he was right. Whatever metabolic response produced in those bodies, it did not broadcast heat the way a wounded mammal should. 3 seconds after the dominant male vanished, something hit Bradley Burton from behind. The second male had come through the water. Not across it. Through it. Staying fully submerged in 43 degrees of bayou water for what the team's timeline reconstruction suggests was at least 9 minutes. No thermal signature, no surface disturbance, no acoustic event before contact. It cleared the bank in a single motion and struck Burton at full run, bipedal, hitting him with both arms, not claws, though the claws were present, hitting him with the forearms like a linebacker executing a tackle with hands that should not have been anatomically capable of the grip they achieved. Burton went into the mud. Mooney pulled him clear. The second male was already gone. Back into the water. It had not tried to kill Burton. It had moved him. Out of position. Out of the team's formation. Away from Kylie's Overwatch line. Leo Morgan said. At that moment, the single sentence that Mooney still hears when he wakes at 3 in the morning. "Weston, they're hurting us." The team broke formation to the fallback position. A slight rise of ground the maps indicated was solid enough to hold a hummock of packed sphagnum and shell middens that put them above the waterline. Nichols established a perimeter. Genevieve Austin had her notebook in one hand and a thermal monitor in the other, and she was watching both with the concentrated expression of someone who had spent years preparing for a moment they never actually expected to arrive. She called Mooney over and showed him the thermal display. 5 distinct signatures, not 6. Arranged at compass points around the hummock except for due north, which remained open, she said. "They're leaving us a direction," he said. "Why?" She did not answer. The north route led back toward the extraction point. It also led directly through the section of the den site the drones had marked as primary habitat. They had been maneuvered into attacking through the front door. What followed between 0251 and 0317 hours is reconstructed from individual operator testimony because the team's recording equipment produced audio files that the technical review board describes as structurally intact but experientially dislocated. The sounds are present, but the sequence is internally inconsistent, as if the recordings were made in a space where time moved differently in different locations simultaneously. What the testimony agrees on: 3 of the six-pack members were killed. A 4th was confirmed injured. The 2 females were not engaged per Nichols's standing order to minimize elimination of reproductive individuals, in order that the inquiry board would later question extensively, and the juvenile was present. Mooney saw it once, briefly, between the root system of a cypress and the water, watching. He held his fire. It held its position. Then it was gone. The dominant male reappeared at 0309 hours, already wounded, and it reappeared not as a threat posture, but as something Mooney cannot describe to the inquiry board without his voice going flat and professional. In the way voices go flat when they're managing something the speaker does not trust themselves to feel directly. The dominant male walked upright, deliberate, to the edge of the team's perimeter, and stopped. It looked at each of them in sequence. Not a threat display, not a challenge. Something Mooney wrote in his field notes as inventory before crossing that out, and writing acknowledgement, and then crossing that out too, and leaving the line blank. The extraction was clean by tactical definition. All 6 operators made the pickup point. Genevieve Austin made it. No one was lost. Bradley Burton had 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder from the contact in the water, and he was conscious and mobile and making inappropriate jokes by the time the helicopter was wheels up over the Gulf of Mexico, and Mooney sat next to him and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like the beginning of a kind of grief he wasn't ready to name. The mission was declared a success. 3 confirmed kills, 1 probable, territory disrupted, den site located, and flagged for follow-on assessment. DARPA issued a preliminary report within 72 hours that used the phrase targeted population reduction 4 times, and the word Dogman 0 times. Kylie Mitchell was the first one to stop sleeping normally. She didn't mention it for 11 days, until Mooney ran into her outside the base gym at 0400 hours, and they stood there in the Florida pre-dawn heat not quite looking at each other until she said, "I keep thinking about the shot, the first shot. I hit him, it perfectly, and it just moved. Like the bullet was a suggestion." Mooney told her that was the physiology, that the DARPA file addressed subcutaneous fat density and skeletal mass and impact absorption. She looked at him the way people look when they're being offered an explanation they know is technically accurate and completely insufficient. She said, "That's not what I keep thinking about." He asked what she kept thinking about. She said, "The way it looked at me afterward, not at the team, at me, from 600 meters away, in the dark, with one of my rounds in its chest. It looked at me like it was remembering me." Leo Morgan filed for a psych evil 10 days post-mission, not because he was struggling, or not only because he was struggling, but because he wanted it on record. He told the evaluating psychiatrist that his core professional function was to make sense of acoustic data, and that the data he had, collected in Vermilion Parish, did not make sense, and he needed someone who wasn't currently cleared for the DARPA project to hear him say that out loud. The psychiatrist filed a report that Mooney was never allowed to read. Leo went back to active duty. He stopped running the ambient acoustic software on his downtime, the way he used to, analyzing weather phenomena, mapping bird migration corridors, the kind of idle professional fascination that had defined him since signals school. He said the software reminded him of what it looked like when something that wasn't seismic registered as seismic. Nichols submitted his after-action report, and then submitted a second document. Not an after-action report, through a channel that required 3 separate authentication steps. Mooney doesn't know what was in it. He knows it was 32 pages. He knows because Nichols told him, once, on a flight deck at dusk, that he had spent 17 hours writing it, and that he hadn't been sure, when he finished, whether he was reporting what happened, or trying to explain it to himself. Mooney asked if those were different things. Nichols said he used to think they were. The hardest part, the part that Weston Mooney still carries in that place behind the sternum where Leo Morgan said the vocalization landed, is not the contact. It's not the kills. It's the juvenile. It's knowing that somewhere in a 9 square kilometer wetland territory in Vermilion Parish, Louisiana, there is a juvenile dogman that watched an eradication team move through. It's home and counted who came, and who left, and who fired first, and who didn't fire at all. Mooney gave the order not to engage it. It was the right order. He would give it again. But 3 months after the mission, he received an unsigned communication through a channel he doesn't discuss, containing a single satellite image, a wetland corridor in Louisiana, time-stamped from 11 days after the extraction, and at the edge of the image, barely visible in the shadow of the cypress tree line, a shape, upright, watching the empty hummock where the team had held their perimeter. The shape was smaller than the adults. The image resolution was not good enough to see the eyes. Mooney didn't need to see the eyes to know that whatever was looking at that empty patch of ground remembered exactly who had been standing there. The DARPA file is now at 241 pages. Genevieve Austin wrote the new final page. She has not shared its contents with Mooney or with anyone else on the team. She told him, when he asked, that it was a risk projection. He asked what the projected risk was. She looked at him for a long moment with her field glasses hanging unused around her neck and said, "It depends entirely on whether that juvenile was the last one or the first. Operation Swamp Altar is officially closed. The territory remains amber flagged on DARPA's monitoring system. The amber designation has not changed. No one who worked the file believes it won't." 6 operators went into the Vermilion Parish Bayou on a classified eradication order. They completed the mission. By every measurable definition, they succeeded. And yet Kylie Mitchell still sleeps with every light on. Leo Morgan no longer trusts his own instruments. Bradley Burton makes fewer jokes than he used to. Nichols has not submitted another voluntary assignment request. Genevieve Austin's final page of the DARPA report remains sealed. And Weston Mooney, 15 years in special operations, 2 combat tours, a man who built his professional identity on the premise that every problem has an optimal solution, still keeps that satellite image in a folder on a drive he doesn't label. The territory is still amber. The juvenile is unaccounted for. And somewhere in the classified infrastructure of American defense research, a risk projection sits in a sealed document, waiting for the day the answer to the question, last one, or first, becomes impossible to ignore. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight to uncover the next operation before it disappears, because some secrets are best left behind midnight.